We've all experienced this, a bad sleep score. And if you've woken up past 4 AM of the next day, you can't go back and fix that sleep score by sleeping a second session. Except that you can. And I'm going to show you guys how that's done in this video. Welcome back to another Pokemon Sleep video, it's Bro Vinny here. Now we're actually going to take this example here as to how I actually fixed that sleep score. And if you remember from two of my earlier videos, we actually did something similar to fix other problems. We used the time zone trick in order to fix a missed meal, and then we used that missed meal strategy and cooked Sunday meals on Monday to give your entire week a strength boost that you couldn't otherwise get. And using that time zone trick, we can also fix a bad sleep score. So we're taking that example just now with my 21 sleep score. Don't worry too much about the time being a bit different to the first image I showed you. That's because I've changed the time zone so it looks a bit different. But in this situation, I've actually slept over 24 hours. And yet, I only got about 21 sleep score because for whatever reason, it didn't count a lot of the data. These reasons could be that you've left your phone or your device tracking under slumbering for too long. Or maybe your phone overheated, or it crashed overnight, or the app crashed overnight. Whatever the reason, it doesn't matter because there's a way to fix it. And it all depends on how far back in time zones you can travel. The furthest back in time that you can travel using time zones is this place. Niue is an island nation just close to the northeast of New Zealand. Famous for its beautiful sceneries, but even more famous for having GMT-11, which is the earliest time zone. So if you select Niue or Hawaii, Honolulu, or any of these early time zones, and you are able to travel back in time to the previous day before 4 AM, and then start tracking, it will actually count as the second session for that day, provided that that wasn't already, your bad data wasn't already the second session. And as you can see here that this session here is only my first session, so I'm still able to go back in time to track a second session for that day without affecting my sleep data for the current day. You don't have to choose Niue or Honolulu, you can choose any region you want. As long as it goes before, it starts, your tracking starts before the 4 AM of the previous day. And it just so happens that Honolulu was at 3 AM when I started tracking at that moment. Whereas had I picked any of these other areas in America, it would have counted the sleep session on the next day instead because they're all past the 4 AM mark. So always double check that you are before the 4 AM mark before you start tracking. And if you are doing it right, the game should tell you to close the app and then it will start again because you would have changed time zone. It always tells you that. And then when you start tracking, so if you're phone tracking and you see this warning, oh, you can only track so much more sleep today, perfect. That's exactly what you need. Because the game is telling you that it recognizes that this is the second session for the day. I'm talking about using phone tracking here because with the plus, it doesn't have this warning when you track. And I went ahead and did my sleep session and completed my 100% sleep score. Perfect. And I still managed to ruin a bit of my sleep data here because I just went slumbering for too long, but that's besides the point. And then when I went back to check my sleep data, just be aware that your sleep data can look a bit funny. For example, here it says Friday session 2 and Thursday session 1, even though you can clearly see that they both belong to the same day. Whereas typically, if it's two sessions of the same day, it will say it's the same date. So normally I would expect that to say Thursday, but because of time zone changes, the game adjusts for this by saying that's a Friday session 2, but don't worry, your actual Friday session 2 hasn't disappeared. When I went to change my time zone back to my current time, you can see that all of the numbers and the dates have changed, but don't worry, they're still counted correctly to the correct days. And you can always double check that by looking at the bar graph to see that the bars are being filled chronologically. So that was the 21 point session, and then that was the subsequent fixing session. Now, as a side note here, the game does inherently allow you to fix your score by manual data, but manual data, as you should know by now, has many problems. One is you don't get a sleep research session with it, and two, you still can't overlap your sleep data. So for example, if you have sleep data that tracks over the 4 AM mark, you can't go back and add manual data to a time that was before that 4 AM. It wouldn't make sense to the game. But if you really want to, let's say you don't want to track sleep, you want to add manual data, well, you can change your time zone and then add manual data. Because before that 4 AM mark still exists, with a time where you haven't slept. And just to be sure, I went back and did it all over again just to make sure that I can do this repeatedly, and I was able to do the same thing the next day. In fact, I'm not the only person to prove all of this. Reichi from my Discord also did similar things in order to fix their earlier sleep score, which was only 86%, and they were able to do a session 2 to make 100% on the day before. But you will get funny looking data, not that it affects anything majorly, but you will get funny looking data where, for example, session 2 happens before session 1, which is not the case. It's just the game going, hang on, there's a time zone change, but this Wednesday belongs to the day before. Having said all of that, at this point it's worth noting you shouldn't rely on this method if you can, because if you consistently be doing this, you might wreck your sleep consistency because the sleep midpoint will be quite far off. The good news is, if it happened because you had a crash data, your sleep data was never going to be that consistent anyway. So in terms of fixing a score, this method is still going to be really good. The game gave me a shiny rat during all that testing. Unfortunately, all that testing was on my alt accounts. Thank you for watching, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe.